Mariner flying boats were stationed in Iceland. The Greer incident involvement of American ships in the system of protection of British convoys became the cause of their armed clashes with German submarines. The Kriegsmarine Command attempted to obtain permission from Hitler to lift the restrictions in actions against the Americans imposed in late June 1941, after the incident with the battleship USS Texas. On June 19, 1941, this battleship was discovered by a German submarine in the blockade zone of Great Britain. The submarine pursued it until the intruder left the blockade zone, but failed to attack it. After this, Hitler ordered that such incidents with the Americans be avoided. Grand Admiral Raeder's meeting with the Führer on July 9, 1941, also ended in nothing. Hitler refused to untie the hands of the Kriegsmarine, emphasizing that the war with the USSR could not be complicated by military conflict with the US. It is vital to postpone America's entry into the war. There should not be any incidents with the United States until mid-October. What the German admirals foresaw happened in Icelandic waters on the morning of September 4, 1941. The American destroyer USS Greer, which happened to be in the area of a German boat group concentration, was attacked by the submarine U-652 and then counter-attacked it. Initially, the destroyer's commander received a report from a British airplane of a sighted submerging boat. The plane then dropped depth bombs at the site of her sinking and flew away. The commander of U-652 mistook USS Greer for a British destroyer attacking his boat and responded with a torpedo attack, prompting a counterattack by the American ship. As a result, both participants in the incident were not injured, but found themselves at the center of an international scandal. After learning of the incident, Roosevelt publicly called the attack on the destroyer piracy and said that now any submarine or surface ship of the Axis countries will be attacked if they violate the principle of freedom of the seas. The incident with the USS Greer was in the hands of the U.S. Navy, preparing to escort from Canada to Iceland its first convoy, HX-150, which suffered no casualties during its escort. Torpedoing Kearney. By October 1941, the situation in the Atlantic continued to heat up, and new incidents were inevitable. On October 17th, the American destroyer USS Kearney was torpedoed during a Wolfpack attack on convoy SC-48. The Germans had discovered the convoy 2 days earlier, several hundred miles south of Iceland. The order of 6 ships was guarded by 4 corvettes and a destroyer. After the pack attacked, the escort commander requested assistance in Reykjavik. The Americans sent to the convoy its escort group of 5 destroyers, which included Greer and Kearney. The latter, on the night of October 16 to 17, torpedoed U-568, which mistook it for a British ship. The torpedo hit the starboard side, damaging the destroyer, but it did not sink. The explosion killed 11 sailors and wounded 22 others. Accompanied by Greer destroyer reached Iceland. What happened made it clear that both sides could use weapons against each other, although Roosevelt was still restrained by the law of neutrality, and Hitler, unwillingness to start an open conflict, while the Wehrmacht bogged down in Russia. Therefore, American destroyers and German U-boats could not yet openly engage. Despite intervening in the Battle of the Atlantic on the British side, U.S. Navy ships had no such orders. That all changed, however, when 2 weeks after the torpedoing of the Kearney, the U.S. lost its first warship in World War II. Reuben James, on October 22, 1941, convoy HX-156 put to sea from Halifax, escorted by a U.S. escort group of 5 destroyers, which included the USS Reuben James, an obsolete Clemson-type destroyer. Ships of this type were built during World War I and were nicknamed four-pipe and smooth-deckers and flash-deckers due to their 4 tubes and lack of a half-bank. During World War II, 91 ships of this type served in the navies of the Allies in the anti-Hitler coalition, including 20 of the 50 destroyers transferred by the U.S. to Great Britain in 1940. The group escorted the convoy for 8 days before handing it over to British ships for protection. During this time, HX-156 was not attacked by German U-boats and quietly moved along the route. But on October 30th, this calm ended. The convoy was detected by the German submarine U-552 of Lieutenant Commander Erich Topp, a Knight's Cross recipient. On the afternoon of October 30th, Submarine Force Headquarters ordered 6 boats, including U-552, to create a veil south of Greenland outside the German blockade zone, authorizing them to operate there as they did in it. The night of October 30th or 31 was moonlit, and so at 05:10, Topp had no trouble spotting the convoy 5 miles away. Having radioed headquarters about the contact, U-552 began pursuit of X-156, periodically broadcasting the course, coordinates, and speed of the convoy. Soon the time was opportune for an attack. At the time of the attack, the escort, which seemed numerous to Topp, was arranged in the following order: 2 ships on the right side of the convoy, 2 on the left, 1 behind it. Since Topp was on the left side of the order, he could only see the left wing of the escort. The destroyers, USS Hillary P. Jones, USS Reuben James, and possibly USS Niblack, which was behind the convoy. Just before U-552 was attacked, the USS Tarbell, a destroyer on the starboard wing, picked her up as she came into the air. He had time to inform the other escort ships, but it was too late. As the Reuben James began to turn to search for the boat, 2 torpedoes were already racing toward it. A moment later, the explosion split the old ship in 2. Its front part disappeared underwater. Seconds after the explosion, the stern kept afloat for 6-7 minutes. After it disappeared underwater, the ocean surged with another powerful explosion. As Robert Howard, the Reuben James's torpedo officer, recalled, it was the depth charges that exploded. Thus, the explosion of depth bombs presumably caused the deaths of about 50 people in the water. The total casualties of the crew of the Reuben James amounted to 115 men, including all officers. The destroyer managed to raise only 46 sailors from the water, one of whom later died of his wounds. The reason the destroyer was such an easy target for Topp was simple. At that moment, the Reuben James was not searching for U-boats and was proceeding without changing course or using a zigzag. Keeping to the convoy's speed of 8 to 9 knots, the destroyer proved to be an excellent target. Captain Louis Denfeld, Chief of Staff of the Atlantic Fleet, said on this occasion, "The issue of night patrols is difficult, as it often leads to overconsumption of fuel, which is already in short supply." Nevertheless, some conclusions were drawn, and by the beginning of the war with Germany, the old destroyers received additional fuel tanks. A very profitable sacrifice. Although the U.S. had already lost half a dozen merchant ships in various incidents with the Germans, the loss of the Reuben James shocked American society almost as much as the events at Pearl Harbor. As with the Kearney, Roosevelt seized on the incident to capitalize politically and gain congressional support for further intervention in the Atlantic War. He introduced amendments and revisions to the Neutrality Act of 1939. Congress responded quickly but cautiously. On November 17, 1941, after a spirited debate, several amendments were passed to the president's satisfaction. Roosevelt could now act. As a result, the Coast Guard forces were subordinated to the U.S. Navy. American merchant ships were armed, and restrictions on entering European waters were lifted. This allowed the U.S. Navy to escort Lend-lease shipments to British ports. In fact, this meant that America was on the verge of war with Germany. However, after the sinking of the Reuben James, Admiral Harold Stark, Chief of Staff of the U.S. Navy, said, "Whether our country knows it or not, we are at war." Stark knew what he was talking about. Now Roosevelt was planning to strike. As the aforementioned Gannon wrote, on November 5, 1941, the U.S. Atlantic Fleet was ready to launch an operation to intercept a German raider in the Denmark Strait. According to intelligence, a sortie from Norway into the Atlantic was expected one of the German heavy ships, the Scheer or Tirpitz. Task force of the American fleet, consisting of 2 battleships, 2 heavy cruisers, and a flotilla of destroyers, ordered to attack the German ship and prevent its breakthrough on the routes of North Atlantic convoys. Had things reached the battle and sinking of the German raider, further events would have been quite predictable. According to German historian Jürgen Rover, Hitler could have turned a blind eye to the destruction of a German submarine by the Americans, But the loss of a heavy ship would have forced him to reconsider his policy toward the United States. The loss of 1,000 German sailors would have clearly outweighed the loss of 40-50 submariners, and Germany would have declared war a month early. Berlin was irritated by U.S. behavior, which was now seen as anything but neutral. Although the Reuben James incident had serious consequences, German command could not blame the boat commander for misidentifying an American ship that not only guarded a British convoy by being darkened at night, but was of the same type as the destroyers transferred to Britain in September 1940. Therefore, after a thorough investigation, Top received no punishment for torpedoing the American ship. Curiously, after what happened, attacks on convoys in the Western Atlantic in November 1941 almost ceased. However, this is not so much due to the Reuben James, but rather to operational necessity. Just at that time, there was a transfer of German boats from the Atlantic to the Mediterranean Sea. Much to Dönitz's displeasure, this significantly reduced the number of German submarines in the Atlantic. As a result, when in December 1941 it came time to strike a blow to shipping off the coast of America, he was able to scrape together for this operation only 5 boats. The sinking of the Reuben James greatly damaged the nerves of Eric Top himself, which is reflected in his memoirs. Thank you for watching the video to the end. Forget to put a like and subscribe to the channel. It's important to us. See you soon.